Winning Ugly by Brad Gilbert, Chapter 8. Destroying your opponent's game plan. Identify the problem. You know who the players are who give you trouble. The opponent whose style of play or type of shots beats you more often than not. For you, it may be a serve and volley player or a retriever. It could be a lefty who always gives you problems. It could be somebody who's very fast out on the court, a bloopster, or someone with a huge first serve. And of course, you get players with a combination of these abilities. Every player at every level has at least one opponent whose style gives him fits. You'll tell yourself, their game just doesn't match up very well for me. That opponent for me is Ivan Lendl. I've never beaten him. At last count, I was 0 for a lifetime. He's like a tennis version of Darth Vader for me. My son Zach even gave me a dinosaur to carry in my bag when I play against him. Maybe it'll scare him, Daddy. I hope it does. When Ivan sees me heading out on the court to play him, it's gotta be tough for him not to drool. He's beaten me 16 times. He's beaten me 16 straight times. On tour, beating that nemesis player is more difficult because pros develop their particular game to such a high level of proficiency that it's tough to find any cracks in their armor. Secondly, when you do force them away from their best shots, their next level of shots is still pretty darn good. That's why Lendl is so tough for me to beat. When I force him out of his A game, he beats me with his B game. And Ivan doesn't have any C game. Fortunately, I don't have to make a living playing just Lendl. And neither do you. However, there are opponents who give you headaches just like he gives me. And against those players, keep what follows in mind. The typical weekend or club player's game is one-dimensional. It's pretty easy to crack open. They've usually got a single shot they like and they're fairly good at. They play a certain style and go with that. Make them change styles or take away their favorite shot and you'll win because their next alternative isn't nearly as effective. In fact, it's probably pretty bad. So how do you do it? First, the bad news. Here's the truth. Some days you won't be able to do anything. You won't be able to turn it around. Your opponent will successfully do their thing and you will lose. They'll successfully attack your weaknesses and make you play their game at their rhythm and you will lose. Some days you will not win regardless of what you do. I've learned that lesson with Lendl. Now, the good news. Let me tell you something else I've learned and apply every single time I go out on the tennis court to compete. Most of the time there is a way to win. You just have to figure out what it is. Club players don't believe this. You probably don't believe it. And if you don't, it's because you're falling into a common trap. Don't overestimate or underestimate. The average player tends to go into most matches thinking the wrong way. They believe pretty strokes mean something. They assume better conditioning means more than it does. They assume the opponents who got more natural ability or has more experience would probably win. They think past results dictate future results. That kind of thinking will get you beat because it leads you to the wrong conclusions. That's why I had to quit scouting players myself and have my coach do it instead. I started to make assumptions about who was going to win or who was going to lose. I started to overestimate or underestimate players. As a result, I either assumed victory or defeat. Assuming victory will get you beat and so will expecting to lose. The only thing I wanted to assume was this. I could win any match against anyone if I worked hard out on the court physically. But more than that, I could win if I worked hard mentally. When I go into a match, I take my lunch bucket and my hard hat. I expect to work for my pay. I came to believe that it wasn't up to my opponent whether I won or lost. Most of the time, it was up to me. And it's up to you too. So if that's true, why haven't I beaten Lendl? Simple. I've had chances and blown them all. In part 3, on psyching, I'll explain how a guy like Lendl will try to beat you with his racket first. If that doesn't work, he'll beat you with his gamemanship. On those days when I could have beaten him physically, he beat me emotionally or mentally. He's a master of it. But the point is, I could have beaten him. He knew how to take back control of the game when he had slipped away. My chance will come again. Knowing who's doing what to whom puts you in a position to consider your options and capitalize on the best one. Next, I want to tell you how to take advantage of the following types of players, shots, or situations that may be giving you trouble out on the court. They include the retriever, the player with speed, the attack to your backhand, the serve, the return of serve, the serve and volley player, the weak serve, the lefty serve, the heater, the retriever. You know who the retrievers are that you play. In fact, you may be one yourself. Don't feel bad. I've been accused of being a retriever myself occasionally. A match I played with Boris Becker in the semis of the 1989 Thriftway ATP Championship in Cincinnati was described as like watching a man chasing a chicken around with a stick. I was the chicken, Boris had the stick. The description may have been accurate, but the chicken won the match in 3 sets by getting everything back over and over again. On that day, I was a great retriever. In fact, I eventually won the tournament with wins over Sampras, Chang, and Edberg. Just so we get our terms straight, let's agree on what a retriever is. The basic garden variety retriever, also known as a pusher, a rabbit, or a golden retriever, stays on the baseline and gets everything back. They don't use pace, they don't use depth, they don't use spin, they don't use angles, they don't use touch, but they do drive you nuts. Everything comes back. They chase everything down and they do it relentlessly. They're married to the baseline. They're married to the baseline and will stay there all day. As retrievers, perfect their game, they may start developing spin, depth, and or pace. But their basic game plan stays exactly the same. Get everything back. The bloopster, or moonballer, is a variation of the retriever or a refinement. Harold Solomon perfected this style and Andrea Jaeger got pretty good at it, hitting balls very high over the net, deep in your court with extreme topspin. Thomas Muster and Jose Higueras use this style a lot. They stand out there and just keep hitting these hard, heavy topspin shots that bounce up shoulder high. Moonballs are frustrating because they hypnotize you. You stand there and before long you quit thinking. The moonballer keeps looping the ball to you without mistakes, over and over again. They're like the garden variety retriever because they really test your patience. The main distinction between the moonballer and the typical retriever is that the moonballer hits the same shot back to you all the time, the big looper. A retriever's style of play can be very effective against an opponent who doesn't know how to break it down or gets frustrated. Boris got frustrated. Toward the end of the match in Cincinnati, all he wanted to do was get off the court and take something for his headache. He was ready to lose.